The rain had already soaked her thin jacket by the time Elena Martinez reached the dimly lit porch of the man she had once sworn never to see again. Her arms locked around the trembling little girl pressed to her chest, her breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts as though she had been running for miles. In truth she had, not in distance, but in desperation, rushing through every street, every closed door, every memory she didn't want to face. Caleb Stone, the man who had broken her heart in 3 different ways and yet somehow remained the only person she believed could save her now. The porch light flickered once, the bulb buzzing as if even it questioned whether she had the right to be here. But Elena raised her hand and knocked anyway, her knuckles stinging, her heart slamming against her ribs, her daughter's tiny fingers grasping fearfully at her shirt. Elena, she didn't know, was still fragile. She whispered back that it would be okay, though she had no idea if that was true. And when the door finally swung open, the rush of warm air that spilled out wasn't what stopped her breath. It was him, taller than she remembered, the shadows of the house behind him framing the sharp lines of his face, his dark hair messy as though he'd just run a hand through it in frustration or exhaustion. Elena, he breathed, her name falling from his lips as though it carried a weight neither of them had prepared for. And though she had rehearsed 1,000 ways to ask for help, every practiced word evaporated, leaving her standing there soaked, shaking, and terrified, clutching her daughter like a shield and a plea. Caleb's gaze dropped to the little girl, and something inside him visibly shifted, something protective, immediate, instinctive, because even if he didn't know her name, even if he didn't know the story behind the bruise near the child's temple, or the way Elena's lip was split, he understood one thing instantly: they were in danger. "Come inside," he said, his voice steady but low, the voice of a man who made decisions quickly and lived with the consequences later. She stepped into the warmth of his home, the scent of cedar and coffee hitting her like a memory she wasn't ready to relive. Caleb shut the door behind them with a soft but final click, a sound that felt less like closure and more like the beginning of something she wasn't sure she could handle. And as he reached out to take the weight of her daughter so Elena could catch her breath, she hesitated, but her daughter reached for him willingly, instinctively, as though sensing safety, and the sight of Caleb holding her child made Elena's throat tighten with emotions she had pushed down for years. He carried the girl to the couch, wrapping her in a thick gray blanket, then turned back to Elena with a seriousness that made her knees weak. "Tell me what happened," he said, and there was no judgment in his voice, only urgency, only concern. But Elena's fingers curled into fists because telling him meant unraveling everything she had fought so hard to keep buried. The man she had left, the fear that had chased her here, the secret she had kept even from Caleb himself. I had nowhere else to go," she whispered, water dripping from her hair onto the hardwood floor, her voice cracking like dry wood under pressure. Caleb stepped closer in one slow, measured movement, not touching her but close enough that she felt the heat of him. "You did the right thing coming here," he murmured, words that were almost too gentle, almost too dangerous. And when she finally met his eyes, she saw not just the man she once loved, but the man who had once promised her he would always protect her, even if she never needed him to. Only now she did, more than ever. But beneath the relief was fear, because she knew that the moment he learned the truth about her daughter, everything would explode. Everything. Elena opened her mouth to speak, to explain, to confess, but before she could, a loud crash sounded outside, the unmistakable slam of a car door, and Caleb's expression hardened instantly, shifting from concern to alert, from tender to fiercely protective, as he moved toward the window with the fluid, silent precision of a man who had trained himself to look danger in the eye. Elena's pulse surged, terror flooding her veins as headlights cut through the rain and swept across the living room walls. "They found us," she whispered, her voice trembling. Caleb turned toward her, jaw clenched, every muscle in his body tensing with a promise she had once trusted too easily, but needed now more than ever. "Get behind me," he said, stepping forward, his broad frame shielding her and the child without hesitation, without question, without any idea that the little girl he was protecting wasn't known to him, his own. and as the footsteps approached the porch, Elena realized that coming here had saved them. But it had also unleashed a truth. She could never escape. The pounding on the front door rattled the frame, so hard that even Caleb, who had faced chaos more times than he could count, felt a cold thread of adrenaline lace through his veins. But he didn't let it show. Instead, he placed one steady hand on Elena's shoulder, gently pushing her back toward the hallway as her daughter clung to her leg, eyes wide and shimmering with fear. And he whispered, "Go to the guest room. Don't make a sound," in a tone that carried both command and reassurance. A tone Elena remembered all too well because Caleb had always been the kind of man who protected first, questioned later, loved silently, desperately, without admitting it. She hesitated, torn between obeying him and staying near him. But the second crash this time against the porch railing made her decision for her. She gathered her daughter and slipped down the hall, her heart hammering so violently she could barely breathe, every step an echo of the life she'd tried and failed to escape. Caleb waited until they were out of sight, waited until he heard the soft click of the guest room door, and only then did he square his shoulders and move toward the front window, peeling back the curtain just enough to see the dark SUV idling in the rain, its headlights slicing through the mist like twin knives, the silhouette of a man pacing aggressively near the porch steps. Recognition slammed into Caleb like a punch to the ribs. He knew that man. His hand curled around her arm with a possessiveness that made Caleb's blood boil even then. Before he knew anything about bruises or late-night crying or frantic footsteps in the dark, Caleb hadn't said a word back then, hadn't interfered, but now he wished he had, because the look in that man's eyes tonight was feral. The third crash came not at the door, but at the side of the house, as though someone were circling, hunting, and Caleb felt something ancient and furious rise inside him, something protective enough to burn the entire world down if it meant keeping Elena and the little girl safe. He unlatched the deadbolt quietly, stepped out onto the porch with the controlled calm of a storm about to break, and pulled the door shut behind him, rain slicing across his face in cold needles. The man near the steps spun toward him, surprise flickering only for a second before curdling into hostility. "Where is she?" the man snapped, his voice sharp and ugly, his fists clenched, his posture coiled like a trap. Caleb didn't blink. "You need to leave," he said evenly, the kind of evenness that made men reconsider their life choices. But this man, Randall, Elena had whispered his name once. Shaking, only stepped closer, spitting rainwater as he sneered. "She's my wife." Caleb's pulse spiked at the word, not because he believed it, but because Elena had never told him the whole story, never explained the full nightmare she'd been living. But even without every detail, Caleb saw enough in the man's posture, his eyes, his arrogance to know he wasn't a husband. He was a threat. "She isn't yours," Caleb said quietly, dangerously, and Randall's face twisted. "You don't get it," he growled, and the venom in his tone made Caleb's muscles tighten. "That kid," but he didn't finish, because the moment he mentioned the child, Caleb stepped forward with a speed that startled them both, grabbing enough that rain dusted off the wood. "Do not speak about her," Caleb warned, his voice low, fire forged in steel. And for the first time, Randall hesitated, eyes widening as though realizing he'd miscalculated. But madness and desperation make foolish men bold, and Randall shoved Caleb back, stumbling as he regained his footing before snarling, "I'm taking them both home." Caleb's jaw flexed, the rain dripping from his hair, the storm reflecting in his eyes as he stepped forward, unshaken. "No, you're not." And before Randall could lunge again, headlights appeared at the curve in the road. Another car, this one familiar, reliable, the old sheriff's cruiser driven by none other than Caleb's closest friend, Deputy Mason Hawley, who must have been on his nightly patrol when he spotted the strange SUV and the commotion on Caleb's property. The cruiser rolled to a stop, Mason stepping out with his flashlight raised, his voice booming over the storm. "Is there a problem here?" And Randall stiffened, suddenly recalculating his odds. Caleb loosened his grip but didn't step back completely, silently daring Randall to lie. The man scoffed, spit into the mud, and muttered, "Not worth it," before retreating toward his SUV, shooting Caleb a final promise. "This isn't over, before tearing away down the road, the red taillights fading into the sheets of rain. Caleb exhaled slowly, only then feeling the ache in his knuckles, the tension in his chest, the wildfire in his nerves. Mason approached, brow furrowed. So he simply said, "I'll explain later," and Mason, knowing Caleb well enough to recognize the finality in his tone, nodded and returned to his cruiser, promising to circle the area. When the night finally fell quiet again, Caleb stepped back inside, locking the door, leaning against it for a moment as the weight of everything crashed into him. Like a second storm, Elena emerged slowly from the hallway, her daughter clutching the blanket around her small shoulders. She gasped, stepping toward him without thinking. "He won't stop," she whispered, her voice cracking, her eyes shimmering with the terror she had carried alone for far too long. Caleb straightened, his breathing steady, and stepped close enough that she felt the warmth radiating off him, close enough that she remembered every moment she had tried to forget. "He won't get near either of you again," Caleb promised, and something in the way he said it quiet, certain, absolute made Elena's chest tighten painfully with emotion she wasn't ready to face. Her daughter stepped forward then, tiny hand reaching for Caleb's, trusting him without needing an explanation. And when her small fingers curled around his, a strange expression crossed Caleb's face. Confusion, familiarity, something deeper, something instinctive, and Elena felt her stomach drop, because she knew that look. Years ago, the night before everything between them had shattered. And now, with their daughter holding his hand, Elena knew she couldn't hide the truth much longer. Not from him, not from herself, not from fate. And as thunder rolled across the sky, she whispered the words that would change everything. "Caleb, she's yours.